welcome back to the Morning Scramble. Our guest is Tommy Richardson of the law firm Friedel and Richardson. Tommy, thanks for joining us. Love the topics that you bring us in the morning, and this morning we're going to be talking about taxi cab safety, right?
That's right, Bo. Nice to see you again. Nice to see you, Tanya. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Never ride in a cab by yourself.
That's one of the golden rules.
Is this across the board?
That's across the board. But if you can't help it, Bo, if you're a young, pretty girl like Tanya and you're out late at night and you have a problem and you're by yourself, always get the name of the cab driver. Look at the decal that's posted inside the cab. They're required to have their identity posted. So always get the name. If you're by yourself, always talk on the cell phone while you're riding in the cab. That tells the cab driver that
you're connected to someone. You're
connected to the outside world. He also knows you know his identity.
What if you're in a taxi cab and the cab is in an automobile crash?
Then
how do you protect yourself if you're injured?
While you talk to the police yourself. You make sure you tell the story of what happened to the police instead of relying on the cab driver.
Right.
One of the problems that we're seeing in the Valley is that there's a decrease in construction jobs, so there's a rise in taxi cab drivers that are inexperienced. And that inexperience leads to breaking the rules of the road and breaking criminal laws as well.
Safety concerns.
Sure.
Now I couldn't tie the two. I can tie the inexperience to safety concerns, but I really in my head don't necessarily tie inexperience to they are necessarily of a criminal nature. Just because you're an inexperienced cab driver doesn't mean you have a criminal tendency. I mean, do you see where I'm going?
I see where you're going. It's the inexperience, the unprofessionalism that leads to the criminal acts. If you have someone who's not used to being in control of vulnerable people, and let's face it, quite often on the weekends, in the evening, when you've had too much to drink, you're vulnerable to this taxi cab driver, and you're not used to having an unprofessional driver is not used to having people within his control. And so that's where the problems come.
So how they manage the situation is what we're talking about.
How they manage the situation, how they break the boundaries of a cab driver, how they take advantage of people while they're...
So there can be physical and sexual abuse and assault in a taxi cab.
I've seen physical assaults. I've seen taxi cab drivers assault patrons because they didn't think the patron was going to pay them. I've seen taxi cab drivers break the rules of the road and hit people and try to deny liability. I've seen actual assaults of females in the taxi cab drivers, by the taxi cab drivers.
See, the only sexual encounter we want in a taxi cab would be in No Way Out with Kevin Costner in the back seat.
I know that movie and that reference, and I agree.
That might be the only time we would...
So you just mentioned generalities there. Are there any stories in the news, or how recent has a story been involving a lawsuit with a taxi cab? Do you have anything, not to put you on the spot?
Well, there are quite a few that are in the news that are spotlighted, but what happens more often is you see these people taken advantage of, the fares taken advantage of, and then they don't come forward. They don't call the police. They don't report it. And that's the most important way or obvious way to curtail this activity is to call the police.
Never thought about this issue before.
No, you know, we get in cabs, or occasionally we do.
Right, you get in a cab.
Not here, but in bigger cities or in the Valley or in Las Vegas or when you're at an airport. And you just don't make those mental notes. I mean, you're absolutely right what he said at the beginning. You should, when you get in, you should make a mental note of the cab driver's name. And maybe you should even look at a phone number on the side of the cab, know which cab company you're getting into. Each car is, I guess, identified, right, by a marker?
It should be, and you should never get into a cab where you're solicited by the cab driver for the ride. You should always call the company to come to you. And just because the cab says licensed and bonded on the side doesn't mean anything, doesn't ensure your safety. It only means that there may be money available after you're injured.
But many times Las Vegas used to be like this. I don't know so much anymore, but airports are like this, talking about soliciting. You don't call a cab from an airport. I mean, you have, when you walk outside of an airport, a line of cabs. So you're not calling for a cab.
That's true. They're bringing the cab up to you to take you where you need to go, and you have to have a special permit to be in the Phoenix airport.
Right, exactly.
But the most vulnerable people are the ones that call the cab to the bars or go out from a bar and pick up
yes.
a cab directly.
Yeah.
That's when they're at their most vulnerable state.
Clarify your destination, but I mean, don't we always, when we get in a cab?
Well, you clarify the destination, but also have the agreement with the cab driver for the amount of money he's going to take you to that destination, and that he understands where you're going.
Interesting.
I don't want to come across as beating up cab drivers, but so I want to be cautious. But I know I've been in a situation where you say, I'd like to go to point A, and you actually define which way you'd like to go, surface streets versus freeway, and they talk you out of it. Maybe, and we assume maybe it's because they know there's a construction, they can run up the bill a little bit or take you a slower pace.
Good point.
Have you ever been in a situation like that?
I see that happen, especially in Vegas, where they'll take you around the strip to the hotel in the long route.
That's right.
You can communicate your destination to the cab driver before you agree to get into the cab, before you contractually obligate yourself to paying the tab. You can talk about it up front. That's the time when you're in the control.
Now, see, you're an attorney, and so I want to see what your take is on this answer. You said contractually obligate. Can you, for a layman like me, define when is the contractual obligation started? When you wave your hand, when they pull over, when you open the door, when you sit in the seat, at what point? I'm just curious.
I think when you wave your hand, you can turn around and walk the other way if you want to.
Right, yeah, right.
When you agree to get into the cab and when he agrees to take you somewhere, there's an understanding there, and you're obligated at that point to pay his reasonable or legal fare.
I think it starts when you say, follow that cab. I've always wanted to get in a cab and say, follow that cab. I think everybody's wanted to use that line.
And I'm sure there have been instances where you get into a cab and you say, you know, you're giving them directions or something, and then you get in a little argument or something, and you say, never mind, pull over, I'm getting out. And you may
what do you owe him?
Yeah.
Well,
you might
you owe him what his meter says for that distance.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's not where you're really going to see the most injuries.
Right.
I've seen cab drivers with fares that are following young girls around in the neighborhood to try to attack the young girl.
Really?
With these people in the back seat.
Wow. There's
I've
a lot
seen
to
all
this
types
cab
of
driving we didn't know about, though. Tell me, how can they get a hold of you?
It's 602-553-2220. Anytime you have any questions, just give me a call.